Are CFOs quietly becoming the real CEOs? And are they now more valuable to organizations than the CEO? With 75% of all CPAs, though, having reached retirement age in recent years, is there actually enough new talent coming into the pipeline? Welcome to Macro Talk, where we examine business news through a big picture lens and help you stay ahead of change. I'm your host, Hope King. With me and with these insights is Pam McIntyre, SVP, Corporate Controller at OneStream, an enterprise finance platform that unifies financial and operational data, embeds AI for better decisions and productivity, and extending all of that to scale to meet an organization's changing needs. OneStream is also the official launch sponsor of Macro Talk. So Pam, thank you for being the launch sponsor and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Hope. Happy to be here.
So one of the things that we've been working on together over the past couple of months is looking into the data that really suggests and shows how critical the role of a CFO has become to organizations. A big Finance 2035 study that you guys have conducted has shown that the role is no longer about managing the numbers. It's about managing uncertainty, people, and change. What are the macro conditions that have led the CFO role to become so front and center right now?
You know, it's been an evolution over the last 10 or 15 years. It's not any one thing. It's like a series of events that has happened that have really changed and shifted the role of the CFO. If you look at a job description now for a CFO, the first line is usually a strategic partner to the CEO. So I was talking to a lot of people, our audit partners, external parties, about how this shift has really been because you're driving business results. The CFO is so close to all of the functions. They're a business partner driving budgeting, forecasting, understanding decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that are driving the performance of the business. And everybody's in business to either make money, break even, or achieve a goal. And measuring those goals is so important to actually being a good company. So the data, all of the things together is why the CFO has really become such a strategic partner. And we've seen that change because of all of the events over the last 10, 20 years. And the changes, we need to evolve so quickly. And that's why the CFO has really changed its role.
I think that the most interesting stat from the study is that investors are really putting a premium on the strategic value of the CFO. Is that something that's also sort of been happening behind the scenes and is only now more recently being elevated and being more noticed? Or has there also been a different shift where CEOs have really found themselves leaning on the strategic insights more because of all the macro conditions that you just mentioned?
I think the CEO's leaning on them more. If you look at a boardroom, oftentimes the person leading a lot of the conversation nowadays is the CFO, because as you're talking about strategic initiatives, the question is how much is that going to cost and what's the return going to be? So the CFO is going to be a strategic partner to the business, to the board, to the CEO, and all investors. And that person that's speaking, the CEO obviously has a huge role, and that doesn't change the importance of a CEO. But the role of a CFO is a partner next to, not behind anymore.
Well, one of the other really interesting stats from the study is that CEOs that you studied, they are saying that they now expect CFOs to be, quote, masters of everything. That's a lot of pressure on one person. And I'm curious how you navigate that. Do you think it's a realistic expectation as well? And how do you actually tackle everything when you're expected to be this, master of everything person?
You know, you just have to take every day as a new challenge. There's something new that's going to come at us as in the finance world. It's a really interesting time to be in finance and to be leading the charge in the finance space and in the role in a company. And being a master of everything is true. It's really an expectation to be able to jump into a project, whether it's an operational project and help with leading that initiative, or whether it's a finance project. So we're not in the role anymore of looking back and reporting results. We're really in the seat of steering the business. And because of all of those demands and the changes and the evolution of foreign exchange, macro, all of the uncertainty with everything that comes at us, I don't think that's any one thing that's going to change the way that we work anymore. It's the way that we will work forever. So we'll always have to be on our toes, evolving, changing, and doing things, and it's not going to stop. So that's why this talent gap is really something that we need to solve. And it's not going to be one solution. It's going to be a series of solutions, making sure we have the right people and right talent that are really engaged in being part of the solution, getting technology that really help augment those things, and making sure that the people in the workforce stay in the workforce. So there's a lot of work to do. So we're happy to be part of helping with that study.
Yeah, let's talk about the talent crunch in 1 minute. I do want to just hear more from you on the role that is now so central to so many parts of an organization, the CFO role, because something that I've been thinking about is really what are the risks that organizations face if they don't have the right strategic CFO in that seat?
I think the more cohesive a CFO can be with the other leadership, the better the partnership, the better the collaboration, and the better involvement in the solution making. So you can drive the results together versus being a almost like a roadblock or barrier to a solution. So you can either be part of the answer or you can be something that might be filtering or a roadblock, or a lot of times we talk about like the bottlenecks in the process and how finance can be a bottleneck. You will see those CFOs that are bottlenecks start exiting because companies don't have that time to have the delay to be responsive to whatever the issues are. They want quick solutions, quick turnaround, not perfection in every way. So if a CFO is a bottleneck, you'll see those people not as valuable in the workforce. If they're a business partner, you'll see them continue getting higher and higher in the value proposition for that company.
I like that. I think for a lot of people who are younger in the workforce, they may also see that role as being the bottleneck. And now that it's changed and to be more strategic and cohesive, to use your word, I think that there's a lot of interest in this. And so the talent crunch study that we've worked on together over the past couple of months, shows there's a lot of interest. 91% of finance professionals say they'd actually encourage the next generation to pursue this field, but there are a lot of issues: burnout, culture, lack of flexibility that people are worried about. And so let's get into one of those issues that people are kind of concerned about. And the main one in this moment is AI adoption. And the AI adoption question, when we were looking at the results together, it showed a very alarming gap among women and men, a confidence gap. And so I'm curious where you see that gap forming and why it formed so early on, and how a company like OneStream can actually help some of the people who are feeling less confident about AI feel better equipped to actually lead in these roles and to get into these roles.
Yeah, I hope it's really interesting because the people graduating in finance and accounting are pretty even. It's 40-60, 50-50 depending on the year of graduation. So the study actually showed that men are 6 times more comfortable leaving university with AI, but I don't really quite understand why that is. Is it that when they're in school, it's not something that's like openly spoken about and it's a secret club, like a fraternity kind of conversation teaching people how to use it? Or is it just that people are more just experimental, men versus women? And so that is going to be really interesting as we dig into the results of what's driving that gap and discomfort for women entering the workforce. But I think as I've talked to new graduates and talked to, head of accounting firms, or the Big Four is a big place that accountants go to as a next step in their education. And a lot of the partners have shared with me that the the students entering the workforce don't have that drive to be working as an entry level staff accountant. They have seen a lot more people come to them after a very short period of time saying this work isn't for me because there's a lot of nitty gritty that needs to be done, a lot of staff level work to learn the basics before moving on and being a valuable contributor to the finance community. But that patience is much shorter now. And so I think we need to train people earlier, augment with technology, make sure we have purpose-built technology that people are comfortable with using in finance because it's secure, it's confidential information, and that is something that I think people aren't quite comfortable with yet. Just like when the internet first became adopted, there were people who leaned into it right away and made their jobs more efficient, and there were people who were fearful of it replacing them. This is like the next version of that. You're going to see people having to lean in because you're going to be required to be more efficient to be competitive. And AI is going to be part of that solution, but it has to be purpose built for what you need. Open AI and open forums will be something that we'll have to be careful of because you don't want to leak proprietary and confidential information, but making sure that it's secure and that you're teaching and training people how to use it and when to use it is going to be really important.
But the enthusiasm for technology is there. We're seeing 73% of female students, for example, being really enthusiastic about developing these technical skills. But only 12% of female students are actually saying they expect to rely on AI tools significantly going forward versus 68% of their male peers. And, one thing that we talked about in Nashville at the OneStream Splash Conference was this idea that sometimes women can feel like using AI is cheating. In your mind, does using AI mean that you're cheating somehow in your job and not doing it the quote unquote right way?
No, not at all. I think it's just like any technology when you're starting something new. You have to get comfortable and you have to understand the inputs and outputs. So, as a new person entering the workforce, a student, how do they know what the answer is right? They need to have some sort of training, development, even just like a baseline of understanding what they're getting and why it's right or wrong. So I think that's some of the fear, the hallucinations, the like inappropriate work. But there's places where you can start building presentations, writing emails, doing things like that that are easy, low-hanging fruit that will make people more efficient. But then there's, more advanced technology like that we can leverage for machine learning or our AI analyst or other tools that we've developed where understanding what you're trying to get the answer to be and understanding the results and why they could be right or wrong to validate it is going to be something people will have to learn over time and learn to leverage. I challenge my team every day. How can we do this better, faster, easier? Because the demands are not going to get less. We're going to build the company. We're going to get bigger. We're going to have more customers, more needs, and we have to figure out how to be efficient. And using AI is going to be part of that solution.
I love that. And I think just to back to your other point about some of the concerns around the sort of rote work that an entry-level accountant might kind of get into, and maybe some people are not interested in doing that.
Okay.
How is AI solving for that? Because there's also concern on the other side that if AI is doing too much, then the entry-level workers don't actually have enough experience with the basics inside of a corporate environment to understand how to build on those skills, that the pipeline could be cut off even with AI as the tool that gets introduced. So I'm curious to hear you say and think more about this kind of tension playing out in the workforce and in the, especially among the clients that you work with as these AI tools are being rolled out at OneStream.
Yeah, using technology to create checks and balances is a fantastic use case. Like, how do I create better analysis that I can dig into for the answers? So it may not be doing all of the work, but it's doing the grunt work that maybe can lead somebody to find better answers faster. So I think over time, that initial, just like we used to have to go to the library and find the Rolodex and then go find the book, we don't do that anymore. You just search the internet to find the answer. And is there lost knowledge between the people who used to have to do the file cards at the library and then go research them? If you asked our kids today, they don't even know how to use an analog phone, let alone search something through a catalog. So I think over time you'll have to rely on some of those manual steps less and less, but we'll have to educate people on what to watch for, what to be important. It'll be up to leadership and management to coach people and younger team members on what they should be doing, because they won't have that first time ticking and tying. They won't learn how to validate checks and balances. There's still an order to teach people, just like teaching any basic skill. You need somebody to validate you and help you through that process.
And it feels like that's the philosophy that OneStream is adopting with AI, as you're being more thoughtful, it sounds like, about how they will ultimately be used, so that you preserve that pipeline growth while adding these efficiencies. I do, though, wonder if the reskilling is sort of enough that you see in the marketplace. Is there one area, even beyond AI, where CFOs generally need to sort of reskill, and something that you would advise younger workers and students coming into the workforce to think about skilling up at this exact moment?
I would just say technology modernization in general. There's so many companies that don't even have the right data to do the work. So a lot of staff just spend their time gathering data. And you would think in this day and age, we're in 2025, that you would just be able to run a report and get the data, but that is not the case. I've worked at very large companies where you have to run around and find the resource, the person that has the sheet, that then you get the sheet to marry to the next thing. And it will take a long time to modernize, people's technologies at companies. These are companies that are hundreds of years old, that have lots of old architecture and infrastructure, even the government. I mean, there's a lot of old technology out there, and it has to be, modernized one piece at a time and be thoughtfully modernized. You can't just go with the next hot things. You have to make sure that you understand the business requirements, that you're meeting those requirements, and that you're really thinking of the growth and future of your company as you're making those decisions.
And as you look toward the future, one of the other challenges, not only with this talent crunch or inspiring younger students and making sure that they feel comfortable getting into these roles, is that there are still so few women in the pipeline in these senior leadership roles. And I think even with this enthusiasm for the profession, the misconceptions or some of the perceptions that are out there about these roles, maybe toxic workplaces or long hours. What else is not sort of being said about the real obstacles that women face as they rise through the finance function, which can be quite fixable by culture or management?
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this before, just having a voice and having a voice in the room. I think a lot of times people are afraid to really rely on their information, rely on their experience, and be able to share their experiences and have a voice in the room. I always tell people, you're in the room for a reason. You've earned your seat at the table, and don't be afraid to raise your hand and speak, because you're there to be a contributor. Everybody has a perspective to bring to the table. So I think that's one thing I always tell my entire team. Like, I want to hear everybody's perspective, not just my own, or not just, my leadership or the rest of the companies, because everybody's part of the company for a reason. We bring something different to the table to ultimately make the company better.
Well, not everyone's like you, Pam. And you know this from experience. You've shared before that just having a woman at that table doesn't always guarantee this collaborative environment that you're describing for your team. So how do you lead in a way that makes it easier for others to follow and not just to survive?
As a leader, I try to ask everybody questions. Hey, so and so, what do you think? Or did I get that right? So that I'm actually asking them, have I understood your question? It may be something I learned as an auditor, just to understand, like, do I understand your process? Am I really thinking about this the right way? And once I realized that going through that as an auditor to the client, they would open up more and more to you and share more details. That was kind of a superpower I earned really young in my career. And so as I've become a leader, I've realized that's also something that people will speak to you if you ask them questions. If you don't ask the question, a lot of times people will be afraid to just chime in.
So how do you, though, if you're not lucky enough to work for someone like Pam and you're in these rooms, how would you advise that young person, that mid-level career person, to find an opportunity if that leader isn't doing what you're doing, asking questions and again, fostering this kind of environment?
I've been in a lot of rooms where people are told to be quiet, and I've really pushed back on that if I've been in the seat where there's something to say. I've been with companies that are going through bankruptcy or very difficult times where I've had to raise my hand, and it might not have been the popular answer. But at the end of the day, I've told my boss or my peers that if I don't contribute that, then I'm not doing my job, right? If I'm not giving that perspective, then I'm not doing the right thing in that moment. There have been times where it was a very difficult conversation with one of the owners of the last companies that I worked for. And I remember having to look her in the face and being like, I'm not doing that because it's wrong. And it was not popular with her at all. And she got very upset about it. But at the end of the day, I knew my ethics, and I wasn't going to do something because it was wrong for the company and it was wrong for the long term of the company. So you have to be able to, like, take a breath, think, and actually be able to, like, actually open your mouth and contribute and not be afraid. And if you ultimately are shut down over time for contributing or for opening your mouth, you may not be in the right place. You have to be able to be yourself and be able to challenge yourself to speak up.
I think I love that story, and I've heard with sitting with you, you've shared it in the past, and I think there's still for some people like a risk, right? Oh, if you really challenged and stood up to her, and she was above you in the hierarchy of the company. For people who are afraid of taking that risk, is it okay to just say, you know what, this place isn't for me? I think sometimes people feel like they are some sort of failure if they're not fitting in right away, or if that environment is making them feel, if pressured or silenced. I'm just curious on that, and I know it's a little bit more of a career advice and not specifically to the CFO role, but I do feel like a lot of people get trapped in those situations and they don't know what to do.
Yeah, culture is super important. One of my mentors, he was one of the first CFOs I ever worked for directly, and he said to me, you need to find your person, somebody that you trust, because even though you don't trust me, you might not have something that you want to talk to me about, and I will not understand everything you're going through. And I took that to heart. I mean, I really have found at every company somebody that I feel like I can trust that you build that relationship with. If you don't have that, you have to find it inside the company or outside the company to have, whether it's a friend or a confidant or a mentor that you've worked with at another company or someplace in your career. So I think that is something that I've really taken very seriously for myself in my career, because you have to have an outlet. You have to have somebody who you can bounce things off of. But culture is really important. If it's not the right culture, just keep looking. You don't need to quit your job right in that moment, but you need to at least find the right solution in the long term. And every experience you have is really a stepping stone to your ultimate destiny.
I like that. I like that a lot. I wish I'd heard that advice earlier in my own career. You do a really good job of just humanizing, your own roles, but just being a very natural leader. And you've also said that humanizing this finance function inside of a company can also be incredibly beneficial to be effective as a leader. So how do you do that? If you're in a finance position, you're watching this and listening to Pam, what do you suggest that someone do to humanize that function inside of the company so that other departments can really see and tap into the full potential of the role?
Explain the reasons. So sometimes it might be you can't do something because there's a specific outcome you're trying to achieve from an accounting perspective. So, I've spoken with the president of the company, the CEO, and actually walked through, directing transactions because of a desired outcome. And it's not necessarily at OneStream, but other places in my career as well. As if you can walk somebody through what you're trying to explain, they will understand much better and they'll be a lot more receptive to you being involved in the process. So whether it's the business and opening a new location, whether it's an investment and taxes, whatever it is, if you explain, okay, here's what we're trying to do and what you're explaining to me, here's what really will happen if we do that. So let's tweak these things this way, and becoming really part of the conversation, explaining it in real terms, not just saying no because of accounting or no because of controls or no because of we don't have the money. But you can say we can do it in a quarter. We can do it in 6 months from now. Here's when we'll have the money. Here's when we can make that investment. Here's how to design that investment to get the best outcome for ourselves. So I think humanizing it, like you said, has really been something that I've seen work very well versus being a siloed role.
And specifically, I mean, it's hard now to talk about certain parts of our identity in this political environment, but there is a specific, I think, kind of advantage in some ways as a leader when you're a woman. And I'm curious if you think that for finance positions specifically, if women bring a certain different level of skills or a certain different skill sets that make them sort of more effective in it.
Yeah, I think empathetic, thoughtful, and less reaction, like immediate reaction, is something that I've noticed very differently between a male and a female, being able to really like absorb the conversation before reacting for the most part. I also say having lots of different balls in the air, like whether it's kids or work or life or whatever, but it's not uncommon to have 100 projects going on at the same time, and how do you keep everything going and straight? That's another thing that, as CFOs are being expected to do more, holding more and more balls up in the air. So if you don't have those skills, you need to bring somebody onto your team who does, that can help you with managing all of the tasks and things on there. And not being afraid to not be the smartest person in the room is the other thing I think is really important that I've seen women versus men. Women can realize much easier for the most part, not like to be sexist, that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but you need a lot of smart people to hold you up in the room. A big network of people that can help you achieve the goals that you want. So I think that's something else that I've really seen as a skill set and a superpower of women that I've worked with.
I love that. I want to get back to the role of the CFO. What is at risk if there aren't more people getting into these roles? What is at risk if more women also don't step into these senior finance roles?
The risk is that you're not going to have the information for the decision making. You're not going to have the analytical skills for it. So if we don't build the resources and the staff and the technology and build that whole ecosystem up, there's going to be a time in not too long that we have that it's like a huge gap. And so we have to make sure that there are people prepared and there are people in the pipeline to help through that process. So I think that's why, we started this conversation. OneStream has started to realize like the workforce that we can bring in our customers and our partners within our own ecosystem, it's harder and harder to find not people, but people with the right skills. So that is something that we really have started to focus on. And that's why we started these studies. That's why we started supporting these initiatives, because we need these people and we need really technical skilled people to be able to support the evolution of people and companies.
So is there one recruiting practice that you think needs to be retired immediately because it's not working, or one that you see working really well that needs to scale up quickly?
I mean, I think workers starting in, banking or audit, I think it's harder to find those people that want to work that 80-hour week, 100-hour week role. So I think that is something that we're going to have to shift from. We're not going to be able to demand that from new staff. So it just might take a little bit of a different approach to get them to join the workforce and to join those type of roles. So I think that's one thing. And then changing the requirements and the technology and the education. I think the educational space is still, when you get your degree, they don't spend much time on technology. So in accounting and finance, like you might build Excel models, you might build PowerPoints, you might do very simple things. I know you went through a very similar education that I did. And if I think of where I augmented it with technology, I've been in the workforce 20, 25 years, but it hasn't really changed from people that I've talked to that are entering now. Like the young staff still do the same basic Excel projects. So we need to change what people are learning, because our world has changed a lot since, that we've graduated. You and I have anyways.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the culture expectation of working these long hours was sort of a badge of honor, decades
For
ago.
sure.
And now it is seen as the kryptonite for a lot of young people who value, rightly so, work-life balance. But if the workloads are increasing, and as you said, and as we've been talking about, as you're growing as a company, as other companies are getting more pressure for profits, that workload is not going to lessen. How do you actually reduce the hours if the needs are not being lessened at all from the top?
You have to find technology that will augment it. I mean, I can tell you when I was a customer of OneStream, over 10 years ago, the amount of work that we were able to eliminate when we implemented a streamlined technology practice was 20 days of work. So if you can get rid of manual workload where you're just collecting data and validating it, that's not value add. People aren't going to feel good about themselves when they're working on what they don't feel like is valuable work and they're not contributing to a real goal of the company. So those people then shifted their workload to more value add work. So we didn't eliminate those people, but we shifted what they did and how they did it. A lot of the work that we do today is collecting, gathering before doing the analysis. And if we can streamline that, you can leverage people better, make them happier and more satisfied with what they're doing, and hopefully relieve some of the pressure of the number of hours that are needed to come up with a result.
Is there enough being done, though, to gather this data for AI to do some of the grunt work? Is there enough speed behind those initiatives? Because there's still a lot of concern, right, around data compliance. We talked about this a little bit earlier, any, proprietary data being leaked.
For sure. I think there's two types of CIOs. There's the ones that are leaning in and the ones who are really just putting up the gate guard and trying to say it's too new. So the companies that have CIOs that are saying it's too new, those are the companies that we have to figure out how to break the barrier and get them comfortable with the purpose built, the security, and those things, because those companies will fall behind really quickly. The CIOs leaning in, some of them might lean in too quickly and maybe put the wrong technology in place. So that is also like a balance that people will have to realize, where are you just implementing to implement and bringing in new technology that might be a waste of cost? or is that the right purpose-built solution for your need? And there's not going to be one answer for everybody, but making sure you understand your business need and your desired outcome first before just implementing something is really a key for companies. I think they need to focus on.
So if you're a young professional watching this, what should they be doing to become indispensable where you have AI shaping how value is actually defined and some of those smaller tasks that they would have done in the past are now being handled by AI?
Practicing critical thinking and analysis, I think those are skill sets that people for sure need to have entering the workforce because the technology, the AI, it's moving faster than any technology that we've seen. So learning any one thing is not going to be the answer. Learning how to learn is truly the answer that people need to focus on right now.
I love it. And if you're a mid-level career professional, if you're in finance, if you're a woman especially, and you're trying to break into that leadership stratosphere, what is the most valuable skill to develop over the next 12 to 24 months?
I would say like business mapping, really understanding how you can actually be a driver of the future change for either yourself, your team, or your company. That was one of the things early in my career that I was able to really get experience in. I think, hope you and I have talked about it. When I came back from maternity leave the first time, I was asked to take on a major project for ERP implementation. And I kind of paused for a minute and I was like, the reason that they're asking me to do this is because they trust that I can. And I leaned into it. And that was really the moment in my career where I took over a multi-billion-dollar company's ERP transformation and had to fix a lot of the issues that were created by my predecessor. And it was a huge opportunity for me. And I realized really planning, thinking critically, and really coming up with a plan to execute against and measure your performance against was important. So that mid-level management, that opportunity can be something that you can really learn from and grow from for the rest of your career.
I love that. And the last audience that we want to talk to in this last question is the CEO. What is one misconception you wish that more CEOs and business partners would drop when it comes to working with finance leaders?
Ooh, I would drop. That's an interesting one. I think, honestly, the thing that I would say CEOs should drop is really thinking of each of their functions as separate and really thinking all of their leaders as one leadership team. Some companies do that, but the companies that don't bring those leadership teams together and have a handful of common goals that you're measuring yourself against consistently, if every department has their own goal, the goals aren't going to align. It's really the strategic goals from the top down that need to align, and you can't have too many at once or everybody's running in different directions. So I would say 3 top down, 3 goals top down. Once those are done, put a new one on so that you can keep focusing, driving new initiatives and getting results.
I love that. I could listen to you all day, especially with the insight that you have and the experience that you have, Pam. It's been a pleasure to chat with you today on all of these topics. And thank you again to your team and all of OneStream for being the launch sponsor for Macro Talk.
Yeah, thanks. Congrats.
Thank you.